Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special Screen Actors Guild conversation with the cast of Sound of Metal. I'm Dave Karger. That's Dave Karger. And I am a host at Turner Classic Movies. And this is a film that I have been raving about to everyone I know since I first saw it a little over a year ago at the Toronto International Film Festival. So it is such a pleasure for me to introduce 5 members of the cast of the film. So joining me are Riz Ahmed. Hello, Riz.
Hi.
Olivia Cooke is here. Hello, Olivia.
Hi.
We have Paul Raci with us. Hello, Paul. Chelsea Lee is here with her ASL translator, Yolanta Galloway. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
And Shaheem Sanchez is joining us along with his ASL translator, Zachary Goldstein. So hello to both of you as well.
Hello.
Hello.
Because all of you come to this movie from such different places and levels of experience, I want to start by asking all 5 of you the same question, starting with you, Riz, which is, how did you hear about this project that Darius Marder, the co-writer and director, was working on? And what was your first reaction to the story, Riz?
You know, it's funny you should say, just as you were asking the question, I kind of had to look up at the screen and you're right, we do come from such different places. You just kind of just even look at all of us that are here within the cast of this film. And that might sound like an obvious thing to say for people who are kind of watching from the outside. We've got such different backgrounds, different life experiences, come from different cultures. But actually, I feel like I've just kind of realized that in this moment, because making this film together, it really felt like coming together of a kind of family, and we created our own little kind of bubble in our own little world. But of course, you know, none of that kind of jumped out on the page. That was down to, you know, Darius's commitment to making sure he cast this in a way that was just felt real and authentic, and as you said, really diverse. In terms of how I came to it, it was just the page, you know, it was just a script. I didn't know Darius, I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know anything about this project or its long history and how many years he'd been trying to get it made, how it's such a labor of love. I didn't even know that Darius had been involved in writing, you know, 2 of my favorite films, you know, of the century, which is, you know, Blue Valentine and Place Beyond the Pines. I just had this script and it just blew me away. And there's something really special when you have such a pure connection with a project, and it's not about any of the noise or who else is doing it or okay. It's just, this is blowing my mind as a story. Before you even get to the question of like, you know, could I take this on? Yeah, and how scary that might be. It was just about it being a beautiful script that Darius wrote.
Olivia, how about you?
Yeah, much the same as Riz. They were going to shoot, I think, in like a month. No, like a few months, and another actress had already been attached to it, and she had dropped out, and then I was flying back to New York from LA, and I got the script from my agent saying, you know, Darius would like to meet if you respond to the script, and I think he was meeting a few other people, and I read it over the course of the flight, and I just had such a visceral reaction to just how lush and fleshed out and raw these humans were on the page. So much so that I was crying so much that the air hostess came around and gave me a piece of chocolate because she felt really, really bad for me. And I was like, oh no, I'm fine. But it was just, I just felt like the script was unlike anything that I'd read before. And I know a lot of people say that all the time, but it really, really was. And even if I'd been, you know, I don't know, just a runner or a PA on the set, like I would have wanted to be a part of it, just because I think the same as Riz, like you just believe in it so much. And yeah, it was just the reaction that I had to it really blew me away.
Did you and Riz know each other already?
No.
Wow. Okay. Paul, how about you? Same question.
I just live in my regular life here in LA, and my agent gave me the script that I had an audition for it. I had the same reaction, Olivia, when I was done with the script. I burst into tears. What I was attracted me to this role, Joe, was that it was so close to myself, in that both Ruben and Joe are not culturally deaf. They are adults already set up in their pattern of their hearing ways, and they become deaf. So the fact that they have to learn how to communicate in a new way with a whole nother culture, I thought was very interesting, because there's a whole population out there of people that we think they're not hearing people, they're not deaf people, they're totally isolated and cut off from everything because they don't know sign language and they can't speak with hearing people. Like my wife, who's a hearing person, over the years gradually lost her hearing totally in her left ear. She has about 30% in her right ear. And so is my mother-in-law, so do many, many other people that people don't think about as being deaf. So I was fascinated that the deaf community was involved, that AA might be involved, addiction. I love the script. Yeah, I fell in love at first sight.
Chelsea, what about you? This is the first acting credit that you have. How did this find its way to you?
Hi, folks. Really, it was just good fortune for me. The auditions were advertised in Boston, and I was living in Boston at that time. So just by happenstance, I auditioned. I met Darius. I felt an immediate connection, and it feels like the rest is history. Jen, my character, as Paul mentioned, it felt like it was the role that was written for me. I saw a lot of similarities between Jen and myself as a queer person, and reading the script. Personally, as Chelsea, I come from a family who's deaf. I was born and raised with deaf parents. My siblings, cousins, and so forth are deaf. So I always had access in life, and I never felt lost. I never felt like I had something that I then lost later in life. So it felt as though this was me, really me and Jen, we were made for this together, and experiencing hearing loss through the character of Ruben really was so emotional for me. And the story is authentic. Truth be told, Dave, it's real. People don't know that this happens more often than not. And the ability to share that on the screen with the world it's incredible.
I remember talking to Darius about this a year ago and asking him, how often does this happen? And he said that in this original script, there was a lot more specificity about the actual condition of how Ruben experiences this. And I think Darius and his brother, who he wrote it with, decided to take some of that out. But yes, my understanding is that this is something that happens regularly. So that makes it all the more fascinating. Shaheem, how about you? How did you come to play Shaheem in the film?
Well, in the movie, my character is Shaheem myself. So, I live in LA. Darius contacted me, but from another person from ASL Music Cap named Kelly Curdy. She said that Darius trying to get my attention. So we had an interview on Skype. We interviewed, and then he liked me. And then after that, he sent me the scripts, and I feel, wow, it's very touched me because it's about the deaf community, and for one thing I will, and get them back to the deaf community. And I feel like Darius is really about the community.
Well, that's clear. It's clear that that was very important to him to show their respect to the community. Riz, when you and I talked a year ago, we touched very briefly on your kind of internal preparation for this film. And when I watched it again a couple of nights ago, I just really paid a lot of attention to the moment where Joe, who Paul plays, talks about, it's not about fixing this, it's about fixing this. And for people who don't know, your character suddenly goes through catastrophic hearing loss, and he's a punk metal drummer. So this is devastating to him, and he's trying to deal with it. But that, to me, is the center of the film. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this process was different for you as far as the extraordinary kind of internal inward exploration that you had to do to play Ruben effectively?
Yeah, I think you're, really wise to point that out, because yeah, there's two kinds of preparation you do for anything, right? Or at least there's the kind of more external demonstrable stuff, which is like learning American Sign Language or learning to play the drums. And both those things were really daunting and challenging, but also tremendous privilege. I think that's just one of the deepest privileges of what we get to do, is getting to explore these new skills and live these different lives for a short period of time. And learning the drums and learning ASL really enriched my life. I think opened my body up in new ways. They're both non-verbal ways of communicating. And as someone who uses words a lot, and as a rapper, I think it just unlocked something in me. And I'm so grateful to Jeremy Stone, my sign instructor, my friend, and to Guy Licata, my drum teacher, for their patience. And, we just spent every day for 7 months just, trying to embody those skills best I could. But perhaps in a way, a kind of deeper breakthrough for me was that internal exploration that we were talking about, which is looking at addiction, looking at the desire to fix yourself, to fix others, rather than accept yourself, and really tapping into that feeling that I think a lot of us have, because our society really, I think, encourages this feeling that your worth is based on your usefulness, or your worth is based on your idea of usefulness or productivity. I only have value if I get to play this role of a drummer, the role of this boyfriend. Even me, Riz, I only have value if I get to play this role of Ruben. We all internalize this BS rather than thinking we have worth in ourselves. And it was really about tapping into that and kind of going to meetings and going and Darius, I think everyone will attest to this. Darius was really about us bringing ourselves to these roles, and he brought so much of himself to this script, and the way he directed it and led us all. I think he just really advocated for us to, bring some of this to it. And so it felt different to me in the sense that even though in some ways it feels like the furthest away from myself that I've ever played, in a way, I feel like it's some of the most personal work I've ever done. That's testament to the way Darius has created that safe space for us.
The movie has to make us believe in the first act, Olivia, that your character and Riz's character are not only in a relationship, but are a successful musical act. Given the fact, and I did not know this until you just told me that you came on to the project on the later side, here was Riz, who had months to perfect the drumming skills. How did you decide how you would try to do your external research on the music side, given the fact that you didn't have necessarily a ton of time?
I think I had about 2 months, I think. Can't remember now, it was so long ago, but I think about 2 months. Darius got me in touch with Margaret Sade of Pharmacon, and she basically taught me the piece on the guitar, how to loop on the loop pedal, how to scream. And then Riz and I, we were off doing our own separate rehearsals, and then we came together, and it was very nerve-wracking, wasn't it? As we morphed, as we merged the band together. But it was so fun. Like you were saying, Riz, it is such a privilege that we get to learn all these different skills, but just inhabiting the role of someone who's screaming into a mic and having this really cathartic experience on stage. And then we got to perform it live to an audience who were then encouraged to scream and shout and to go crazy in the crowd. And it was really wild, you muster up the courage to do it, and then it's over and you're like, oh God, did that really happen?
Paul, I was so moved by your performance in this film. You're just such a fascinating presence. And I wanted to learn more about you. So I did a little bit of research, and please correct anything that I get wrong here. But I was really curious to find out what the similarities were between you and Joe, the man you play, and where you two diverge. My understanding is that both of you fought in Vietnam, whereas Joe has lost his hearing. You, Paul, are a hearing person, but you have many people in your family, I think including your parents, who were deaf. I'm curious to know how much, if at all, did Joe, the character, change once you came on board? Like, was he already a Vietnam veteran and that's a happy coincidence that you were too? Or did Darius and his brother change things in order to make it even closer to you?
Well, one thing I forgot to mention, when I first read the script, Joe was an Iraq war veteran. And I read it and I thought, wow, that's interesting. And then I saw the line where it says he loses his hearing in a bombing incident. And so I told Darius, I did 2 tours of Vietnam. And so they just switched it because that's how old I am. That's how I was in the 70s. And so they made it a Vietnam War character. And the other thing that got me was I was on an aircraft carrier as a medic. And a lot of the guys that worked on the flight deck, in those days, they wear these little Mickey Mouse ears. And in the 70s, those Mickey Mouse things that they had to protect their ears are about as thin as paper. I don't know how these guys got away with doing this to our boys, but most of the guys that worked on the flight deck with me on the USS Coral Sea are deaf because of that constant banging and the machinery that goes on when you're doing bombing incidents or bombing raids every night and day. So they just switched it, and it was very easy for me to fall into this role. It really was very close to me. And
your character signs throughout the movie, obviously that's something that you didn't even need to kind of bone up on or freshen up on. That skill was already 100% there for you. Yes, because American Sign Language is my native tongue, so to speak. So my parents were deaf. That's how I first learned how to speak, how to get what I needed from my parents to survive. And English is my second language. So, but for this character, I didn't want Joe to be a fluent ASL user like I am when I'm with my friends or my family. Joe's had to learn this over many years. He had to come to grips with his hearing loss as an older man, and then learned his language. So I think deaf people will see some of my sign choices and what I'm doing there is not what I would call the way I speak to deaf people. Signing and speaking at the same time is not the optimal way to use ASL, American Sign Language. So there are clues throughout. If you watch Joe closely, it's not his native tongue. That's fascinating. Chelsea, you alluded to this in your first answer, but I want you to talk a little bit more about how important it is to you to not only represent the deaf community, but also to represent the LGBT plus community as Jen in this movie.
Truth be told, I'm honored to be a part of the movie. And oftentimes when watching movies, whether it's me or the community at large, folks are looking for an identity, like a queer person or a disenfranchised person. Nobody ever looks for a straight person. Nobody ever looks for an able-bodied person. So really, for me, it was like the best person for this role is somebody who had this lived experience, and not because they weren't the same identity as the person on screen. So I think in terms of intersectionality, the representation was really accurate. And it's just nice that it happened to be that I'm a deaf queer person.
And Shaheem, for you, can you tell me a little bit more about your performing background? This is also your first official film credit, but what kind of performing have you done before this? And what was this experience like for you working with so many hearing impaired performers?
Well, for me, I have been working with a lot of different people teaching ASL with dancing. In the movie, my character that I'm showing deaf children my choreography with sign language. So that's my style. So I teach dancing with ASL and different people, and that my role for making match more that deaf people can explore. You know,
That's great. Riz, was it at all strange or overwhelming for you to go through the process of learning the drums and the ASL at the same time? Was it very compartmentalized for you, where you had days where you were focusing on one and other days where you were focusing on the other, in addition to probably just living your life and working on other things that you were doing at the same time? How hard was it to balance it all?
So it was kind of immersive. It was every day. I was doing both every day for several hours, and and no, there wasn't really kind of so much, as Olivia will say, when we kind of have to respect what these characters do and the people who really do this for a living. So there wasn't so much living life outside of it. It was quite full on for those 7 months, just doing both every day. And I guess they're compartmentalized in the sense that, I'd work with Jeremy in the mornings and I'd work with Guy in the afternoons, but in the sense that they're both, as I said, non-verbal methods of communication, and in the sense that they kind of opened me up physically in new ways. I think there was a tremendous amount of overlap. And I guess, Jeremy, my sign instructor told me this, and I know if, Chelsea and Shaheem, if you can verify this or not, but Jeremy would say, look, sometimes there's this kind of saying within the deaf community that hearing people can be emotionally repressed because they hide behind words. Whereas within the deaf community, because there's such a premium on communication, people share their feelings a lot more, people share their secrets a lot more, and hearing people can kind of hide behind words. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't think of myself as kind of repressing feelings. And it was when Jeremy started getting me to talk about Ruben in ASL and talk about things that really truly mattered to me and to the character in ASL, I found myself getting emotional, in ways that I hadn't anticipated, because I was communicating with my whole self. And so, yeah, I guess again, it's another way of saying that it was daunting, it was challenging, it was a new thing, but it was a privilege and it's enriched my life tremendously. And I'm only sad that I haven't managed to keep up my ASL at the level where it was at, where I was able to be conversant and feel the joy of that, of connecting with people in that way. And I wish that ASL and British Sign Language in the UK, I wish they were things that were more widely taught and widely learned at school. There's just a whole world and a whole community of people that could be connecting more than they are currently. And I hope this film is a window into that world for some people, and it might inspire them to take up those connections.
Shaheem, can you confirm what Riz heard, that deaf people are often more emotionally open and communicative than hearing people?
True. That's true. Yeah, I feel deaf is more open. A lot of hearing people don't open up much. When I try, I feel like I'm more real, more blunt. So I'm more like telling my story. Most hearing people don't do that. That's what I've noticed. True. Yeah, I'm good.
I like that. For anyone who has seen this movie, and I'm imagining that most people who will be watching this conversation will have seen it, Olivia, I want to talk specifically about one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Not an easy scene to watch, but a scene where you are basically getting into a taxi cab and having a very emotional moment with Riz's character, Ruben. It's such a powerful moment, and it speaks so much to your character's character, and what her priorities are and how she wants to help this man that she's in love with. What are your recollections of the day? I imagine it must have been close to a whole day filming that scene, and what it was like to go through that.
With every scene that we did, it was all pretty fast. We had a lot of prep beforehand where we could talk at length with Darius about our characters and where they're coming from, and especially the codependence that Ruben and Lou had. And I think just knowing that she's coming from a place that the only way he can, you know, get a grip of his mental health and his addiction is to be away from her and to figure that out for himself. But we were shooting it on film, so there wasn't a lot of takes that we could really do. So, it definitely made you feel like you had to just be so cognizant and so switched on and so emotionally invested the characters all the time. There was seldom a moment when we weren't either talking about the characters or having these experiences as Lou and Ruben. We were in the trailer for a lot of it as well, just being in that space, and it was very fast, and I feel like we got it in a few takes, but it was just the emotions, I think, for Riz and I were just always just kind of there, ready to come out, because we had lived these characters for so long and also knew each other and trusted each other so much at that point as well.
Now we're having a flashback, Riz, to interviewing you and Darius a year ago in Toronto, where you were giving him a hard time for only letting you guys do like 1 or 2 takes. And you were like, God, I would have loved a little more time to do a take again instead of just, recording wild sound. You would have loved those 10 minutes to be used for the take. But in seriousness though, Riz, was that one of the biggest challenges of this movie? The fact that for whatever reason, because it was on film and because it was low budget, you had to get everything kind of on the first, second, or third try?
So that scene you're talking about, we got 2 takes on that, and mostly we get like a couple of takes. And you know what? It was a challenge. It was also a tremendous gift. I feel like that's kind of a big thing that I've learned from this whole process of making this film, is that those challenges are gifts. That's what Ruben discovers. He discovers that the challenge of his hearing loss is actually on some level a gift for him, to not to try and say as if it's not, it hasn't had a really difficult impact on him and his life and his identity, but on a spiritual level, I say, it is a gift in that he is forced to look at his life and look at who he is. And I don't know, I feel like all the challenges in this, whether it's learning ASL or learning the drums, they were gifts, and only having a couple of takes, like Olivia says, it's just on. There's no, it's just, you just got to be there and you just got to give everything. And in a way, when you have all the time in the world and all the money in the world, and that takes some of the pressure off. I think for a film like this that requires us to bring so much of ourselves, it would have been counterproductive almost. So yeah, I was giving him shit about it, but it was probably wise of him to make that choice.
For anyone who watches this movie, and it's sad to me that more people won't see it in a proper theater, because yes, you guys shot it so fast, but Darius brought on a sound designer who has worked on movies like Gravity and Arrival, all of these big sci-fi movies, because the sound design of this movie is so important. We as an audience have to understand what Ruben is going through inside his head physically with the loss of his hearing. Paul, I'd be curious to know from your point of view, obviously Darius must have talked to you while you were filming about what his goals were with the sound design of the movie, but what was it like for you when you experienced the film in its finished state for the first time and realized what he and his sound designers accomplished?
Well, it was very moving, but as I said, my wife is a hearing person who's lost her hearing gradually and then a rapid decline over years. And she's described the same, I can't begin to my hearing's perfect, but my wife has the same experience with the ins and outs, with the muffled noises, with the embarrassment of having to ask what's going on, the confusion. And that's one thing that was very telling about the script. And Darius, that whole thing about there's nothing, we had to fix this, not this. You know, when my parents were alive back in the early 50s, there was that feeling of, you know, the hearing man's oppressing me. I can't go get a job here. I can't speak the language in my own country. And about 20 or 25 years ago, I started meeting more deaf people that were in the acting profession, and they were starting to get militant about it. Like to call me hearing impaired, I don't want to speak for deaf people, but to call me hearing impaired, it means there's something wrong with me. There's nothing to fix here. Just let me live my life. And that attitude got stronger and stronger and stronger. And here we are in 2020. And I think most deaf people like to think of themselves as there's nothing to fix here. You're you and I'm me. Am I wrong, Chelsea? I mean, is that?
You're not wrong at all, Paul. You're absolutely right. 100%. And just to add to that, as I mentioned, I do come from a multi-generational deaf family, and I never felt that I was impaired. I never felt I lost anything. In fact, I feel like I had deaf gain. And so this world in this movie is not my lived experience. I happen to have an interpreter for this interview because you all don't sign, not because I don't speak. So that's the way that I look at things. But I oftentimes don't have access to things. And if everybody could sign, then we would have a very different experience, and we all communicate in different ways. But yes, Paul, you are absolutely right.
My father would come home from work every day. My father would tell me, you know, this hearing guy, it's like he's got, you know, his foot on my neck. I mean, that's only, you know, it's like the hearing oppression was so much. It's not that way anymore. I mean, it's a different world from when I grew up.
Mm. Riz, a similar question for you. When you saw the finished film, did the sound design turn out like you imagined it would when Darius was describing to you what he was wanting to do?
You described it to me, but it's hard to imagine it, right? And for anyone who has seen the film, it is just so next level. Apparently there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of audio tracks in this film. You know, you mentioned some of those films like Arrival and Gravity. It's unheard of for a film of this scale, of this size, of this budget to have that level of sound mix. That, you know, people just wanting to work on it because they understand the innovation and again the challenge that they would present to kind of render that audio experience. So it surpassed all my expectations. I just remember, you know, when we were talking in Toronto, that Nicola, sound recordist, would come up to us after every scene. And normally when you finish a scene, a boom operator will come and say, let's do the dialogue again, get a wild track just on the dialogue. But on this movie, Nicola would come with a microphone rig and put it against my chest and ask me to blink and then ask me to swallow and, you know, stuff like that. He didn't ask me to break wind, but he asked me to just kind of, you know, just exist. And he would pick up all the minutiae of Ruben's inner audio landscape to reflect, as I understand it, as his hearing loss increases for the external world, there is that transitional period where he hears more of his internal processes, and his hearing becomes more vibrational within his body. So it was something that I'm not sure anything like it has been done before in sound, you know, in terms of sound that we see in movies. And I just think it's kind of exceptional. It really adds to the experience of watching the film.
Okay, a couple last questions before I let you all go. Olivia, this is a very minor, kind of almost trivial point, but because there's going to be a lot of actors and performers watching this, I think I'm going to ask you, given the fact that you and Riz are both British playing American so convincingly in this film, I just want to know if in between takes or at lunch, if you and Riz were together chatting, Were you chatting in your British accents or were you chatting in your American accents?
I didn't keep it in between, but I think what happens when I'm doing an American accent, and I think subconsciously, I'm just not as, my accent as it is now just isn't as strong. So like I upward inflect like an American, and the rhythm is kind of the same as I would talk as Lou. But I remember trying that when I did my first American job when I was 18, trying to stay in my accent throughout the whole day. And then I just got really embarrassed and ended up just not speaking all the time and not speaking to anyone. So no, I didn't. But it is funny that, I mean, that we're both British and playing these very American characters.
What about you, Riz? What did you do in between?
Yeah, Olivia's very like just incredible in so many ways, as you can like see in the film, and she just has this amazing ability to just switch in and out of stuff and to be able to kind of like joke around whatever and be in her accent and then just come back in and just drop back into character and burst into tears. It was just like, wow, it's amazing to be around. I kind of would just trip myself up if I go back to this accent. So usually when I play a character with an American accent or an accent other than my own, I just stay in it on set the whole time. And that way I guess I just don't have to think about it and trip myself up.
I began with a question that I had all five of you answer. So I'm going to end with a question that I want all five of you to answer, starting with Shaheem. I know a lot of people haven't seen this movie yet, but it has played at some festivals, and you guys, I'm sure, have had a couple screenings here and there. What's been something that someone has said to you after seeing this movie that has meant a lot to you?
It means a lot to me because some people came up to me and said, wow, that movie feels so inspired. I felt emotional. I felt connect. Thank you for having that meaning, flaunting. Everything was perfect in the movie. It touched a lot of people because I haven't saw it yet, so I don't know. So I bet it's going to be inspiration to a lot of people and to the deaf community that will.
Chelsea, how about you?
Could you repeat the question, Dave?
Is there something that someone has said to you after seeing this movie that has meant a lot to you?
Oh, yes. I think many hearing folks that, like we talked about before in other interviews, people are thinking this is a bit of a PSA, if you will, for folks who can hear. They've never had access to the deaf community. They didn't even know that we existed, if you will. So a lot of people are shocked, truth be told. And they come to me saying, I can't imagine losing something. And meaning, that the world is accessible for deaf folks is something that they carry. And that means the world to me. And I hope that's the message that comes out with this film.
Paul, can you answer the same question?
Sure. You know what? I'll be perfectly honest. This is the first opportunity that I've had in my long acting career to have a role like this in a movie. You look at my IMDb, you can see I'm usually the bartender, the desk clerk, the scruffy guy. I've been doing theater, equity theater out here in LA at Deaf West Theater for 30 years. So if you've never heard of me, it's because you've never been to a 99-seat theater. So for me to have this opportunity, to have this kind of a role in this kind of a movie is the biggest honor of my life. And power to the day players.
Yeah. Olivia, what about you after it played in Toronto or other places? What's a reaction that has been meaningful to you?
I think the reaction, obviously, having a movie that explores the deaf culture so much is amazing. But more than that, you have these two languages in the film, but all the themes are so universal. Mental health, addiction, codependency, heartbreak, confusion, being bewildered. And I think it doesn't really matter what language we're all speaking, it's just so raw and powerful. And I remember being in the theatre in Toronto, and Paul, you and your wife looking around as it finished, and we're all just like, you know. And I think that's like a really nice reaction when you see that at the end of the film.
Riz, what about you?
I think just something that was beautiful to hear from people was that they've never seen anything like it. And that's really, I guess, you know, something, just a beautiful thing to hear, the idea that maybe this film could open people's eyes to worlds they haven't seen, or open their hearts to things they hadn't, you know, experienced or felt before. It's just kind of like pushing things forwards a little bit and bringing us closer together at the same time.
I can just tell you, seeing it twice a year apart, there were images, moments, scenes that were just burned into my brain from the first time I saw it. And I was so happy to watch it again. And I hope everybody watches this movie, if you haven't already, Sound of Metal, either in a theater or on Amazon. And again, I want to thank all of you, Riz Ahmed, Olivia Cooke, Paul Raci, Chelsea Lee, Yolanta Galloway, Shaheem Sanchez, Zachary Goldstein, for being here today and for taking some time and talking about the movie. Many, many congratulations on it, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks.
And thanks to you all for watching. See you soon.
Thanks, folks.